Okay, let's see how this goes. So yes, the idea is first 15 minutes I'm going to, no one's turned that over by the way. I'm going to talk to Akram and ask him about his work as a choreographer and dancer. And then he's going to, we're going to turn tables and he's going to ask me about my work as the artistic director of Sadler's Wells. Yeah?
Yep.
So, I thought we'd start, because we don't want to presume you know anything about dance, because not everybody does. And Akram comes from a tradition which is even a smaller part of the whole dance world, and that is Kathak, which is a North Indian, that's his origins anyway, North Indian dance style. So I want to just ask Akram to quickly explain what that is, what Kathak is, and then we're going to show you a little clip to give you a visual representation of that. So what is Kathak?
It's hard to explain very quickly, but it's in simple terms, it's a North Indian classical dance form, as Alistair mentioned. Gatha means to tell a story, so predominantly it's a storytelling dance form. There is an abstract part of it, which is extremely rhythmical. It has a great sense of energy, which is kind of, and also they've adopted the notion of turning, which comes from Sufism, because the Mughals invaded India between 16th and 19th century. So it comes out of India, North India. And so it's a predominantly Hindu classical dance form, but it's taken a lot from Islamic culture too.
And its origins, were they religiously connected? The very beginnings, was it like in Bharatanatyam in South India? Was it performed in temples or in religious situations or not?
Even before temples, it was performed on the streets, and it used to be a one-person show, you know. And but it's steeped in very much Hindu mythology, and then it eventually went finally to stage. Through temples and then to the Mughal courts and then to on stage.
Yeah. So we're going to watch a little clip of Akram performing an excerpt from a piece called Gnosis, where you see him perform pure Kathak style. It's very rhythmic and athletic, but it's also very seductive, isn't it? It's a very seductive art form somehow.
It was right? Originally it was to, in a sense, not just seductive. It was it was quite religious. It was quite spiritual, but also because of the Mughal courts.
Yes.
You know, it was quite seductive towards, especially towards the princes and the.
Yeah. And when did you start When did you start learning Kathak? How young were you?
I think around 7, yeah. And then on my journey, Michael Jackson came along. And
we're going to come to Michael Jackson.
Okay. Right. Bruce Lee, Muhammad Ali, Charlie Chaplin.
Yeah, these are early influences.
Yeah. And so Kathak, it's funny that you call it pure, that I'm doing pure. I think nothing's pure anymore. It's interesting. I mean, it's definitely not pure. I don't even know what pure is anymore. So we're exposed to so many different things.
Yeah.
But I think it's simpler to call it classical Indian dance, Kathak, yeah.
I meant it as a relative term because, as you'll see in the next clip, you moved into a different direction. Yeah. Although, which is contemporary. So you went on to train in a contemporary college, and you started to perform in that sort of arena. Yeah. But what's stayed in your work is this notion of storytelling. Because even in your contemporary work, you are always telling us a story which is both personal and universal. Is that because of the Kathak in you, or is it because you are just naturally a storyteller? I mean, where does that come from?
I think I'm naturally a bullshitter. I mean, I improvise, I literally lie a lot. Especially, I used to never turn up to school, and if I did turn up, it was very late. And I was always late, so I developed a habit of being able to give a new excuse, really honest excuse of why I was late. And that then developed into storytelling. Okay. And it became more embellished, and no, literally. Yeah. That's how you learn. You learn by, in the end, our civilization, I mean, we are gossipers. We're great storytellers. I mean, that's how we kind of are separate to animals. Mm-hmm. Because we believe in something that doesn't exist necessarily. Sure. It's not physically there. It's a mythology. And so, and also my mother was a huge influence on me because she used to read me a lot from the Mahabharata, from Greek mythology, from Islamic stories.
Akram's mother is here, actually, as is his father, just so you know. So we are. I think it's a bit more than trying to fool people or tell stories in that way. I think you also are driven to tell something about your experience, aren't you, in your work, to be honest?
Yeah, I mean, I love mythology. I've been studying it for a long time, particularly Hindu mythology. But I think for me, I wanted to tell stories that were embodied because I was always terrified by information. I was more fascinated by knowledge, and knowledge for me is information that is embodied. So I wanted to tell personal experiences. And so, but at the same time, I didn't want to make it just my story. Somehow, how do we connect the personal to the universal? That connection always fascinated me.
Yeah, and that really comes across. So we're going to watch another little clip now. It's the only other clip we'll watch, and it was actually my first production with you, called 0 Degrees, and it was a collaboration with Sidi, Larbi, Cherkaoui. Just tell us very briefly this section we're going to see, how that came about.
He told me to tell him something in a rehearsal, a story that I had never told anybody, and he filmed me. And it's my story through Bangladesh, being British Asian, being at the border of Bangladesh, going to India, thinking that my passport was more powerful, the color of my passport. Anyway, so he said, well, how is it my story? So he learnt the exact same story from the video clip with me, with all my mistakes, and that's,
We're going to see what came out.
And what I remember is that there's these guards there who look very, very powerful. And they don't have glamorous, powerful, whatever kind of army kind of clothes. They're dressed in very simple shirts and trousers. But what was interesting was their expression on their face made them very powerful. And actually, it's that expression in the eyes that kind of made me feel like, that was saying to me like, you are under my control, and you know it. So don't upset me. Don't even grab my attention, because you will feel the consequences. Actually, that kind of eyes they had, and what was interesting was, even on the way back from coming in from India, I studied their eyes a little more, and they really were soulless, and they really were, their eyes changed depending on the mood. So if any of them was like, I want to pick on you, they'd pick on you. Their eyes would say it. So, anyway. I felt already this tension. It was already hot. The sun was up, and I could feel this real tension between the people who were congregated from the bus, who were dropped down from the bus, and these kind of guards that were on the sides. So anyway, we stand up in the line, and everybody quiets down a little bit. And this guard comes around and takes our passports. And I'm like, why do we have to give our passports? And they say they have to check it. My cousin just says, just give it to them. I know these are the regulations. And then eventually we gave them, I was convinced by him to give it to them. So I gave it to him, and he walked around and gave it to another guard who gave it to another guard. And I'm like, fuck, he has my passport. Suddenly I realized how vulnerable I felt. Because if that passport disappears, where is my proof of identity? They could just say I'm Bangladeshi, I'm a bandit. It's amazing how much a passport holds, how much power a passport holds. A passport holds between a good life and a bad life. Between life and death, I mean, it holds everything in just a piece of paper.
So obviously, in the words there, you're talking about identity and your clash, where you're sort of coming across this other way. You're meant to be from Bangladesh. So why are you feeling like this? Why are you displaced? Why are you not connected to that place? And that's a really common theme in your work, isn't it? Is this situation where you were born in London, your parents are from Bangladesh, you don't feel at home totally here, you don't feel at home there definitely, and that's really something you want to speak about, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, very much so, and I think, funnily enough, I think everyone's going to be speaking about it now in the world. We're all somehow don't belong in one. I never believed we belong in one space. I mean, of course, the empires and the imperialists discover a country and put a flag and say, well, this is the king's place or the queen's place, but nobody comes from one particular place. I think we all have immigrated and we continue to migrate. And so I've always been fascinated by it. But also when I'm in school in South London, I was looked at as the brown guy who lives, whose father is a restaurant owner. But when I'm in my Bangladeshi community, I'm looked at as the boy who's not very academic. And when I'm in Bangladesh, I'm looked at as the foreigner because I can tell by my accent and my behavior. Yeah. So I've never really quite felt.
I think just looking across the whole spectrum of dance at the moment, that is a common theme, and it's what is a stimulus for much work, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, Larbi is the same in a way, has the same issues. It's not just you. It's a kind of theme that's going on at the moment. The other thing about that clip, you may not think that's a dance performance. Of course, they do dance later on, but of course it is. Because this language of gesture, it's also connected to Kathak, isn't it?
Very much so. Yeah.
And so
it's very codified. Yeah.
So you've really taken all of the. I mean, we call you a contemporary artist, but you've taken so many of the elements of that pure or ancient form and transformed them and taken them into your daily practice as an artist, as a contemporary artist.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm fascinated, but I take a lot more and more from other cultures, not just from Kathak anymore. I'm fascinated by Indonesian traditional dance, and it's about absorbing. And it transforms what you do. It informs what you do. So
okay, I've got two more things to ask you about. First is collaboration. So you, as you saw, this work with the Larbi was definite collaboration. So you came together on equal terms as artists, and you've done that a number of times. Most recently with a flamenco dancer, Israel Galván, which is wonderful. Also, always working with artists, so with Antony Gormley and others, and Anish Kapoor. Why collaborate?
I think for me it's about exchange, but it's like a performance. I mean, yes, you're performing to an audience, but it's also about an exchange. When you perform to an audience in one country and when you perform to an audience in a different culture from a different country, it's a very different experience. And when you perform for 500 people, if you perform for 501 person, it's very different. And somehow this sense of exchange was always something that was in my curiosity. And I always try to also collaborate with people who are much smarter than me.
Good idea.
because then I'll learn something. If they're my equal or I feel like I'm smarter than them, then it doesn't really, I don't benefit in that way. So I always try to get the people who probably would say no, but I try to convince them to collaborate. But also perspective is very fascinating. I'm interested in how one looks at an object like a glass. I mean, for me, I will look at the movement of it. For a composer, they will look at the music of it, or the sound that it makes. And for a visual artist or a sculptor, will look at the material it's made from and what shape it evokes, what metaphor it evokes. So, because then I learn more about myself. I learn about my own art form through other people's genres.
But you do it in an unusual way, which is, I mean, most dance artists collaborate because they have to. I mean, you know, there's usually music or say stage set or lighting. But you offer an equal platform. So with Larbi, you went on equal terms, and that's quite a rare quality.
Yeah.
I mean, that's something. Where does that come from in you? And you're not like other artists who are so stuck in your own kind of world and what your voice has to be. You're very willing to open up in that way.
I think it's I think perhaps it's a generational thing, because the generation before me, I don't think they collaborated as much, perhaps, especially on equal terms. You know, I worked with one particular composer who's in his 70s or 80s, and it was fascinating because I said, I would love to collaborate with you, and it's very, very exciting. And he shouted at me. He was like my hero, and he said, you cannot influence my music, and I'm not going to influence you with your dance. I'm going to give you the piece of music, and you do what you want to do with it, but you don't change my music. Yeah. And what I was interested in was how would he influence my dance? That for me, it's a dialogue, it's an exchange, not one does one thing, one does the other, and then we put it together and see what happens for me. And so it could be a generational thing. I mean, Larbi and I, and many other people from our generation is.
It's true, it's true. I was in Paris yesterday, and I saw this on a hoarding in a theatre, a Bob Wilson quote. I think with my eyes, he said, because he was talking about how the visual is really dominant in his work. He doesn't think in text, and he doesn't think the text is the most important thing. And I suddenly thought, well, do you think with your body? Is that sort of part of your process? Is that what you think of? I mean, do you think, or do you just move, or are the two things not inseparable?
I think that's why I get into so much trouble. In school particularly, I move first and then think after. And that's caused a lot of problems.
Shoot first and think after.
Yeah.
How are we doing? Have we got to swap over yet? We have, okay, go on then.